Okay. Now I'm not sure exactly what you've covered about the structure of the book of Daniel yet, but have you looked at the fact that the book of Daniel is written in two different languages?
It was mentioned, bit of Aramaic, bit of Hebrew.
Yes. Chapter 1 is written in Hebrew. Then the opening of chapter 2, but as soon as the wise men answer the king in Chaldean, it switches to Aramaic, and then it's right through to chapter 7 is Aramaic. So pretty much chapter 2 to 7 is Aramaic, and then in chapter 8 we jump back into Hebrew. So we've just switched back into the Hebrew section of the book. Now, a question would be, what is the significance of that? Keeping in mind that Aramaic was the language of, Babylon, the nation at the time. It was sort of the universal language that was across the empire. If you're writing one work and you put part of it in the language of your local people and part of it in the international language,
it would be who it's the targeted demographic would be.
Yep. While all of inspiration is God speaking to us and teaching us things, there's a specific part of the book of Daniel that's a message for the whole world. Okay, but there's parts like the health message in chapter 1 is focused on preparing God's people for the tests ahead. Okay, and then chapter 8 onwards is a message specifically focused on telling God people about the times ahead. It covers a lot of the same stuff in that middle section, and especially in chapters 2 and 7. But we notice not only is there a change in the language used, but a change in the imagery used as well. Now, can somebody read for me just Daniel 8, chapter 1? There's a particular word I want to pick up on here.
In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first.
So what information does Daniel give us there in the opening of this chapter?
Time frame.
And what is the time frame?
3rd year of King Belshazzar.
Absolutely. And he also makes a reference to
something that happened before.
And that's referring back to the vision that appeared to him at the first. Now, when was Daniel's first vision?
Chapter 7.
Yep, and chapter 7 verse 1 starts out by telling us it was in the 1st year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So he's dated both his visions there. So this is 2 years after the first vision. Now, this is a little bit of a word study, but I think Daniel's telling us something important here when he tells us that the vision appeared unto him after that which appeared unto him at the first. Now, that word after is what I want to look at. What does it mean that this second vision appeared after that which appeared at the first? Now,
sequel?
The sequel?
Sequel. Yeah.
That is a very common understanding, and it's the one that sort of jumps to mind first, that Daniel's speaking in a temporal sense of chronological events. But when I thought about that, it almost seemed a little redundant, because he's just dated both visions, and why is it significant to tell someone that the second vision appeared after the first? But the word after is used in many different ways. There's the the temporal sense, as you mentioned. This event happened after that. But can somebody read out for me 2 Kings? Second Kings, verse 17 and 15.
What chapter?
2 Kings, chapter 17, verse 15.
And they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he testified against them. And they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the heathen that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them, that they should not do like them.
So there, when it talks about Israel went after the heathen, what does after mean in that context? What's he trying to tell us?
It's not time.
Yeah.
It's following, or not quite following. It's the wanting to emulate is the best one I've got.
Yeah. This is what's referred to as the metaphorical use of the word. It's where, in this case, the heathen set the pattern or established the norm, and Israel followed that pattern. Okay, so that they set the pattern and Israel followed it. This after in this metaphorical sense. We see often when it talks about Israel followed after the sin of Jeroboam. Okay, it's the same thing. Jeroboam established this idol worship, specifically the most significant one was at Dan. And when Israel went to worship the golden calf there, they were following after the pattern that Jeroboam had established. And so the word after, it can also have another logical meaning, which is it's kind of similar to metaphorical, but we won't get into that. But the big question here is the temporal setting intended, or this metaphorical setting intended? Is there referring to a chronology in time, or is it referring to their following something that was established? Now, if we jump back into Daniel 8 and we look at that, he says, the vision appeared unto him after that which appeared unto him at the first. Now, I just want to share my screen for a second, because there's actually another little hint that doesn't actually get translated here. Now, so we've got the word appeared there. If you notice that Strong's number, H7200, it's the same word used here after that which appeared. But if we jump here into the Hebrew, now don't worry, it's simple to explain. We just need to follow those numbers. 7200, that which appeared, which is right here. That's our Hebrew word. In time it's used down here, you notice it's that same word, but it's got this one little letter in front of it. Now that little letter there is the Hebrew definite article, the word the. So when we jump back into the English, it's actually saying The first vision appeared after the appearing of the first one. So Daniel's saying he had this first vision and he saw these things unfold. And the second vision follows after that same pattern. Now, that is something that I think, as you would have noticed as you've gone through, there are many similarities between Daniel 8 and Daniel 7. You know, so in Daniel 7, what are the things that it covers?
It uses beasts to cover 4 divisions of time,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose is the easiest way to put it.
Yep. And it's got 4 beasts, which cover the kingdoms of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. And then it speaks of a judgment. Now, in Daniel 8, how many beasts do we have?
The ram and the he-goat
Mm-hmm.
and the little horn.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got 3.
But remember, with the little horn,
He's got 2 chunks. He's
a horn is not just a beast, is it? There's only actually 2 beasts mentioned.
true.
And then this
Yes.
other little horn emerges. So we've been told that the second vision follows the pattern that was established by the first one, which looked at these 4 nations. But the second vision only has 2 beasts. So I get from that these 2 beasts cover the same time periods that the 4 beasts in Revelation 7 cover. And I'm going to share a quote in the chat from an author who you may not have known, wrote on the subject, but I'm sure everyone will know their names. This is from Sir Isaac Newton. And he wrote this in his works on the book of Daniel. He said, the second and third empires, representing the bear and the leopard, are again represented by the ram and he-goat, but with this difference. The ram represents the kingdoms of the Medes and Persians from the beginning of the 4 empires, and the goat represents the kingdoms of Greece to the end of them. By this means, under the type of the ram and the he-goat, the times of all 4 empires are again described. Now, that's something I read, and that's something I agree with him here. So the question is, do we actually see this when we look throughout Daniel 8? Okay, am I just making stuff up, saying that Daniel patterned this after chapter 7 when we look at his usage of the word? Is Isaac Newton making stuff up? Or do we actually see that when we begin to look through? So the first question we have to ask is the ram here, does that match with the time of the lion and the bear? Now, can I get someone to read out Daniel 8, verse 3 and 4? This deals with the ram.
Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. So I'm just thinking, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great.
Okay. So what does Daniel see the ram doing there?
He stood before the river.
Mhm. And then,
Oh, and then he's pushing. So the westward, northward, and southward would be the three ribs.
Mhm.
And the standing, no, hang on.
So the ram has a
What?
conquering phase, but before it's conquering, he sees it standing in its place.
He's also building because
Mm.
the horns are the sides are sorting themselves out.
Mhm.
So while they're sorting themselves out, Babylon is ruling. So that's the lion phase. So while the lion's ruling, these guys are sorting themselves out between themselves. The Medes and the Persians are sorting themselves out.
Mhm.
And then the pushing west, north, and south is the ribs, which is the bear.
Yep. Now, are people aware of, do you know what the superpower was before Babylon arose? Who was the previous one that they had to conquer?
Was it the Assyrians?
Yep, the Assyrians. The Assyrians were in charge. Their capital city was Nineveh.
Hmm.
And Nineveh was actually overthrown by an alliance between Babylon and the Medes. The Medo-Persian Empire was there when Babylon first rose to power. They had an alliance and they overthrew the Assyrians. Then the Medes went back into their place and stood there while the Babylons, or the lion, carried on conquering. And during that time, because at that time the Medes were more powerful than the Persians, but during that time the Persians rose to dominance. So you had, at the time, so when you actually read about them coming on the stage, it's, Cyrus the Great. And you just read about, some histories just speak about the greatness of the Persian Empire because this imbalance happened. So there it describes the ram, this kingdom of Medo-Persia, but first Daniel sees it during the time of the lion, when it was standing in its place. And then he sees it during the time of the bear, when it was conquering. And in the same way, when we first see the he-goat with this great notable horn conquering the ram, and then it has 4 horns coming up, that parallels what we saw in Daniel 7 with the leopard, who came after the bear with 4 heads. But what happened after the leopard? There was a 4th beast in Daniel 7, and from it arose a little horn. But if someone can read verses 8 and 9.
Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land.
Now, again here, when it comes to where this little horn arises, again, there's questions of how do we match the grammar, which we're not going to look at right now. But with this horn is arising, what is the only beast that is present when this horn arises?
The leopard.
Yeah. It's Greece.
Because out of one of them, so the only one before that would be Greece, would be the leopard.
So In Daniel 7, it describes a fourth beast with a little horn coming out of it. Here, it's the goat, but it describes the goat in that phase. And so that seems to indicate that this little horn is sort of a Greek horn, okay? Now, keep that in mind. And I want us to jump to Revelation chapter 13. And can somebody read for me verses 1 and 2? Revelation 13, verse 1 and 2.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority.
Now, the language used here, where have we seen that before?
Daniel 7.
Daniel 7, absolutely. It's rising up out of the sea. It speaks of having the 10 horns and 7 heads, which is if you add up all the beast heads in chapter 7 of Daniel, there's 7 heads. It's got leopard, bear, and a lion. Okay, so it's got all those features, right? And so this is the sort of the culmination of what that vision was pointing to, which was that little horn power. Okay, but the question I have is, while it's described as having features of all of those, what one of those beasts is it like?
A leopard.
So it had the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion, but when he saw it, it says, this beast is like a leopard. And the leopard represents Greek. It's a Greek-like beast.
So if you just take the feet and the mouth away from the 4-headed, 4-winged leopard, there's actually, percentage-wise, there's not a lot change. It'd be what? 4 feet and a mouth would be maybe what, 10% at most? And I'm being generous. So it's still 90% leopard, or maybe 95%.
Yep. And so what we're seeing here is the same thing as we're seeing in Daniel 8. With this horn that represents that 4th power, it's coming out of the goat. It's a Greek-like horn. And here, when Revelation gives us its version of that little horn Antichrist power from Daniel 7, it describes it as a Greek-like beast, a leopard-like beast. Now, I'm just going to share my screen again, because I just have this on a little chart here. Actually, I'll see if I can make this a little bigger. There, that should be easier. And so simply, we've got Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, okay? But the difference is why the bear and the ram both represent the Medo-Persia. Daniel 8 looks at the ram during the time of these 2 kingdoms, okay? So they match up. The goat of Greece, okay, it's the same kingdom, but whereas Daniel 7 moves on to the next kingdom that conquered it, Daniel 8 looks at their scope, this Greek kingdom and how it unfolded through this time, through this little horn and its phases that match up with that 4th beast, but from this point of view that it's a Greek-like horn, just like Revelation 13 had this Greek-like beast. And with this matchup, we also see that the cleansing of the sanctuary mentioned in Daniel 8 covers everything that we see in Daniel 7 with the judgment. These are the three sort of events, things that are happening in Daniel 8 and how they match up to Daniel 7. Now, the next thing I want to look at is the vision of Daniel. You can sort of roughly divide it into 5 sort of acts. Okay, 5 things that happen. The first deals with the ram and what he does when he comes on the scene. As we read out there in Daniel 8, in verse 4, he started to conquer. How does it sum up what he does? What is the final word there? The final phrase of that verse?
He became great.
So he's going and he's becoming great. Okay, now keep that in mind, because we're going to look at the he-goat next in verses 5 to 8. When he comes on, he begins to talks about him conquering. Can somebody read from Daniel 8, verse 5 through to 8? It reads what it does, and then it sums up it all up right before he's broken. Can somebody read that out? Daniel 8, verse 5 to 8.
And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven.
So again, what does it describe the he-goat as doing?
Smiting the ram? Oh.
Yep. Do you have something else to add, Galen? He was smiting the ram, and
I'm just noticing that the where was it? That the oh no, okay. I thought he was standing before the river again, but it's not. It's who Daniel had seen standing before the river. I thought he'd gone back to standing because he was kind of settled. But he waxed very great.
Yep. So we see
it's kind of like God saying, you know, day 1 was good, day 2 was good, but the whole lot, it was very good. And the creation week.
And so far we've got the ram. It discusses its conquering, and then it sums it up by saying, and became great. Then the he-goat, the kingdom of Greece, it's conquering, and it sums that up by saying, therefore the he-goat waxed very great. Now, when we get into the time of the little horn, can somebody read verse 9?
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land.
So this is describing the little horn conquering, you know, south, east, and towards the pleasant land. Okay, it's conquering in directions on this earth. And again, what is the description it uses there?
It waxed exceeding great.
Hmm.
So greatness is growing,
Yep, yep, absolutely.
essentially.
Hmm. And so this is the little horn and what's referred to as horizontal conquering. Okay, it's conquering in the on the direction of the map, southeast and towards the pleasant lands, towards the Holy Land, Jerusalem. Now read verse 10. We see a change in direction. Okay, can someone read that out? Daniel 8, verse 10.
And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them.
Hmm. Now here we have a new direction to its conquest, don't we? Who's his target in verse 10?
Up
Hmm.
to the host of heaven.
It's
It's
gone from,
now vertical.
yeah, it's gone from being horizontal to vertical. And in this new phase of a vertical attack, what do we see again when it's summing this up?
It waxed great.
Hmm. And so we see in every phase of this conquest of these nations and powers that are coming, it became great, it waxed great, it waxed very great, exceedingly great, here great again. And now in verse 11, there's another attack. And can someone read that out? Daniel 8, verse 11.
Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down.
Now in
Sorry,
this,
I'm loath to include that word now
in,
as I read it.
in this verse, in this phase of expansion, what is the target? Or who is the target?
The prince of the host.
So here we've got the little horn. It had a horizontal target against south, east, and towards the pleasant lands, horizontal against the host of heaven, and now specifically targeting the prince of the host. And how does that verse open? What does it tell us about him?
He magnified himself.
Hmm.
Yea, he magnified. Does putting yea in front of it increase? Or is it like an arrogance thing, or a intensifier, I think is the word I'm looking for? Or even so, or guess what this guy did type thing.
Yes. Yes, I think it is. It's referring to you know, the I suppose the definiteness of this exaltation that's happening. And I just want to show one point on this. I'll jump back here. And that is the word we use here for he magnified himself. Okay, it's this word here, Gadol. The H1431. It's the same word used here for waxed great, 1431. Same when the he goat up here, waxed very great. Okay, it's just Gadol again with some extra Hebrew words to intensify it for very, Gadol Meod. And it's the same word used up again in each one of these cases. So in every single scene, the conquest of the ram, the conquest of the he-goats, the little horns attack horizontally, it's attack vertically, and it's attack against the prince of the host. And each one of these 5 scenes, these powers attacks have been used with that Hebrew word gadol, to magnify, to exalt, to make themselves great. Okay, and so this is just something that we see following through consistently throughout this entire vision. Okay, in every one of these scenes. And this is one thing I think we need to consider when we look at the word daily. Because when we look at the word daily, that word, to me, that they've made it daily sacrifice, because they're joining it to what Antiochus Epiphanes did. But that word daily, it simply means continual. Okay, I will share my screen again here. Okay, so we've got the word. Yeah, by him the daily. Okay, this word here, Hebrews 85:48. It's the word tamid. And when we see where that appears in the scriptures, its most common translation is continually, continual. Then we've got daily, always, always, ever, perpetual, evermore. So we get the idea is that there is this continualness that is happening.
Continuity would be a bit much of a stretch.
Yeah.
Or does it
always
change it
it's the
ever
same
so
thing.
slightly?
You continuity still has that idea of regularness, but it's the idea that it's always happening. Okay,
Okay,
it's
so maybe not.
continually happening.
Okay.
And so the question is, if we wanted to understand, okay, it's presented to us with this thing, and by him, this continual, this always, this daily, okay, was taken away. Okay, so far in this vision, what has been the thing that has been continual in every phase of that we've seen? What has been happening always in each of these things?
Conquering and warfare,
Hmm.
or conquering as a result of warfare.
Yep.
And horizontally too, isn't it?
Yes, horizontally, vertically. And in every one of these 5 phases, the powers are exalting themselves. That word gadol is repeated in every single phase of expansion or attack. So far, continually, we are seeing the ram exalted himself. Okay, the Greek goat exalted itself. The little horn exalted itself horizontally, exalted itself vertically, and exalted itself against the Prince of Hosts. So we hear that this exaltation is growing. So we have this growing sort of exaltation of these powers. So that is sort of the first clue that we have when it comes to understanding what the daily is. It's not enough for us to put our finger on it yet, but I think this should start us thinking that when we ask the question, what is the daily? What is this continual? You've got to ask, what has the vision presented already as being continual? As being, as you're going to say, consistent through each of the previous scenes of the vision.
Power has been growing.
Now, there's another point I want to look at that's going to build into this. We have, and then that is the symbols being used in Daniel 7. The first beast that's mentioned is a ram. Now, where do we see rams mentioned in the Bible? Where are they significantly appear?
And sacrifices. There's quite a few in the the one that goes on for a week, is it Tabernacles that there's quite a few animals like every day for a week? That can't be Tabernacles, that's not right.
Mhm.
Is it Tabernacles? I wrote them down somewhere.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
it's got like
there-
bullocks, lambs, and rams,
Mm,
and each day is a different number.
yes, there are lots of them combined up. But just to show something, I'll just share my screen again. Now, if I do this, can you see the search that's come up? Okay, so I've just searched ram throughout the Bible. The first reference that comes up is where God made a covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15:9, and a ram was one of the animals he was going to offer up when God confirmed his promise to Abraham through a covenant. Okay, then we have God providing a ram instead of Abraham offering up his son. But from there, all these references deal with the sacrificial system. Okay, so these first two deal with the sacrificial system as well, but these ones specifically step into the sanctuary. Okay, and so a lot of these just cover through the sanctuary, the sin offerings in Leviticus, you know, again, the rams of consecration, the rams for the burnt offerings, the rams for the sacrifice of peace offerings, and these continue to come down, the ram of the atonement. And so you can just see when you start your search, you get all these references coming straight out of the sanctuary. Okay, here again, rams for their burnt offerings. All right. So ram is an animal that has strong connections to sanctuary language. Now, the next animal we see is a goat. And so if we do the same thing and we search for a goat, where do we find that? Interestingly enough, the first reference is that same verse where Abraham offered a ram and a goat when God made the covenant with it. But as soon as we leave that, it's goats shall be offered. Lay his head upon the hand of the goat when he's confessing his sin for the sin offering. And again, on the Day of Atonement, kill the goat for a sin offering. And again, we get straight into the goat being used as a sanctuary animal. So far, whoops. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to close that. The first two symbols we've seen there in rams and goats are both sanctuary language. Next, if we looked at the horns, because after the great horn was broken up, 4 horns came up in its place. And when we look at this again, straight in the sanctuary, they were told, "Thou shalt make the horns of it." This is speaking about the altar of burnt offerings. 4 horns of it upon the 4 corners. So the altar had 4 horns of the altar. Okay, his horns would be the same, and overlay it with brass. So this is the brass altar that had 4 horns. And a little further down here, it says, "And a cubit shall be the length thereof, and a cubit the breadth. 4 square shall it be, and 2 cubits shall be the height thereof. The horns thereof shall be of the same, and thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, the top thereof and the sides thereof round about, and the horns thereof. And thou shalt make upon it a crown of gold." So here, it's speaking about the altar of incense. So both the altar of burnt offerings and the altar of incense had 4 horns upon them. So we've got ram is a sanctuary imagery. The goat is sanctuary language. The 4 horns are sanctuary language. And as we scroll down, the daily, I will look at as well. I will search for that by its Hebrew word. And this is how this is used. When we search for that word tamid, the daily, the first reference is to show bedship before me always. It was to be continually before him. Again, the lamps in the sanctuary were to burn always. Okay, make a holy place for a memorial before the Lord continually. Okay, Aaron shall bear the judgment of the children of Israel upon his heart before the Lord continually. So this word daily is actually a word for the sanctuary. It's not just used for sacrifice, as the translators would put there, but it's used for the showbread. It's used for the oil in the lampstands. It's used for Aaron wearing the breastplate of judgment with the Urim and Thummim before the Lord continually. Okay, it's all the things in the sanctuary that were to happen perpetually, the perpetual incense. Okay, the fire burning before the Lord upon his altar continually. So again, the daily is another language being used here that is sanctuary language. And when the daily was taken away, this word for taken away, we search for this. And we find, interestingly, it's got a few references here before the sanctuary, but it's actually speaking more of being lifted up. The ark was lifted up above the earth. God said to Abram, the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hands unto the Lord. When Jacob took a stone and set up the pillar. It's speaking of lifting up more than taking away. Now, it can be used to mean taken away as well, but this is a matter of perspective. Like if I, to illustrate, if I've got this pen drive and I've got it in my hand, now if I do this to it and I go like this, the question is, did I lift it up or did I take it away? Well, it depends. If you're looking at my hand, it was taken away. But if you're looking at the pen drive, it was lifted up. So the same action can be used to describe both things. And that's what we see here. But I just want to notice when we jump into the sanctuary, we see here, okay, talk about the heave offering, which is waved as heaved up, it's lifted up. The offering is lifted up before God. Everyone that did offer an offering of silver. The word for offering there is the word for lifted up. Again, the priest shall take from the meat offering, from a memorial thereof, and shall burn it. So here it's using the term take away, but notice it's still something that's being offered up to God and burnt upon the altar. Okay, here in Leviticus 4, verse 8, okay, and he shall take off, and he shall take off from it all the fat of the bullock for a sin offering, the fat that covers the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards. Okay, so he's taken all the fat off, and I'll actually just jump over here so we can read verse 9. And then he carries on saying, and the two kidneys and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the cord above the liver, with the kidneys, it shall he take away, as it was taken off from the bullock. Now, this word here, as it was taken off, notice it's the same word that was up here. That was this lifted up, this making an offering. Okay, there it's a different word meaning take away. So that word is used again interchangeably, lifting up and taking away. But the thing I'm wanting to point out here is whether it's the fat that's being separated or the kidneys and the other livers that was being separated, they're being taken away or lifted up to be offered as peace offerings and burnt upon the altar. So when we jump back, I'm gonna have to stop this so I can access my, jump back into Daniel 8. Okay, we've got the ram is sanctuary language, the goat is sanctuary language, and the horns are sanctuary language. The daily is sanctuary language, and this taken away is sanctuary language. Now, before we get up to the daily, previous in that division, okay, with the powers that arise, the ram, the goat, and the four horns, which are the four divisions of the empire. So far, all these sanctuary, the sanctuary language is being used to represent pagan powers. These pagan powers that are exalting themselves are being used to represent, being spoken of in sanctuary language. And so we get this idea that there is this, almost this corruption of the sanctuary coming in. But with that, when we get to the daily, and I'm just gonna sort of make this point, and then I'll finish it here, and I want to see what your thoughts are. But when I've looked through here at what we've covered with the structure, okay, the continual thing that's happening throughout this chapter is these powers exalting themselves, okay? And it's this sanctuary language being used to represent these pagan powers, okay? The daily, as it was read, it was taken away. But this word for taken away is what was used in sanctuary language for offering up a sacrifice to God. It's a priestly act of making an offering to God. So the daily is sort of lifted up as a sacrifice to God. And if the daily is this continual exaltation of these pagan powers that oppose God, seems to be lifted up as a sacrifice to God. Now, let me put it this way. It's as if a power has come, or someone has come, and they've taken all this paganism, all this opposition to God. But instead of being outright and blatantly against God, they've taken this paganism, opposition to God, and now they're standing as though they're lifting this up as though it's an offering to God. They're no longer trying to openly oppose God. They're trying to serve in this priestly function. But what they're offering up is the very thing that is destroying God's kingdom. And in this sense, this daily is this exaltation of paganism. And as we've seen with this little horn power that does this, matches with the little horn of Daniel 7, this Antichrist, the beast of Revelation 13. And one of the biggest things it did was when this papal powers arose, they didn't get rid of paganism. All this self-exaltation, they did that more than any other power before them. You know, it's why when Jesus talks about that time of trouble, okay, this 1260-year tribulation, he says it's worse than any time that has been or ever shall be. Okay, this power made itself exceedingly great, but it did that while claiming the priesthood of God. It expanded itself, it attacked and destroyed God's people while claiming that it was worshiping God. Now, I'm not sure if people have heard this interpretation before. So I just want to ask the question, how is this sitting with people?
We have much to unlearn, I think, is more of a problem.
Interestingly enough,
I can only speak for myself.
this view is actually very similar to what William Miller taught.
Really?
Mhm.
It's yet
Well-
another area where things have been completely turned on their head.
Mhm.
It's one of the points you bring out. The power that, well, did away with the daily, its attack became vertical, which would that make it a religious power?
Yep, I would say so. That fits.
I guess, and I can only speak for myself, I guess it's easier, like this aspect that you've presented. I mean, even though there's so much to unlearn, it still makes more sense than some other ideas and stuff that have been presented about any other subject, you know, when there's something different that comes to mind, that, you know, someone has this idea about whatever, you know, they've done research in X, Y, and Z, but this one makes more sense and seems would be, once there's stuff to be unlearned that has been unlearned, it seems it would be easier to learn, easier to reconcile than what some other fanciful ideas about whatever subject have been floating around of late, or whatever, within the father and son movement. So I'm not very good with words today. It's not working. But do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I mean, it seems logical. It seems, not that logic's got anything to do with it, but it actually doesn't seem that far out, you know, that far off or that far out. It doesn't seem like one of those way out ideas that sometimes people have about different things.
Can I share with you this from 2 Thessalonians? This is one of the passages that William Miller used when he made his connection. In 2 Thessalonians 2,
So he's making this connection with this passage.
yes.
Okay.
So I'll start reading from verse 3. It's a familiar one will know. It says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, that the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was with you, I told you these things, and now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way, and then that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth and shall destroy at the brightness of his coming. So in this passage, Paul is speaking of the same, this Antichrist, little horn, son of perdition power. Okay, he's saying it's that the spirit is already working now, but it can't rise to power. Okay, there's something withholding it and stopping it from taking control. Okay, and he says at that time, what was stopping the little horn rising from power is it was still that fourth beast that was ruling. Okay, the Roman authorities were stopping this little horn from rising, and it says that will happen until it is taken out of the way. Okay, and William Miller looked at the Daniel 8, and it talked about the daily being taken away so that this power can rise. Okay, that little horn power can rise once the daily is taken away. And here we're speaking of another power. Okay, this mystery of iniquity is already working, but the son of perdition will rise once what is withholding him is taken away. And he's saying here it was the Roman government being opposed to all of Christianity is what was stopping the little horn's rise to power. But as soon as that was taken out of the way, then this little horn emerged. Okay, and we see that, you know, as soon as Constantine signed that Edict of Tolerance, the church started emerging, they started forcing creeds, they started persecuting. And so this is where the one that William Miller joined to say that the daily is paganism. Okay, it's these pagan powers, because it was the paganism here that was taken out of the way for the Catholic Church to emerge, specifically pagan Rome. But the only thing that I would add to clarify is how was pagan Rome taken out of the way for papal Rome to emerge? It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't gotten rid of.
Divided.
Well, specifically,
It was conquered from, not conquered like as in warfare, but like conquered from the inside out, as opposed to the outside in.
Yeah. Yep, that happened as it broke down to those 10 horns. So the little horn
Also in
emerged.
Daniel 8 about a host being given him.
Yep. And that's another thing we see is, you know, again in Daniel 11 and further down in Daniel 8, you know, his power was not his own. The host of armies were giving him to enforce his will. But pagan Rome was taken out of the way, and papal Rome took its place. But papal Rome didn't get rid of the paganism, it exalted it. You know, when Constantine, who was the high priest of the pagan sun god cult in Rome, after his conversion, which apparently he was converted around people said different dates, but around 319, he was still the high priest of the pagan sun cult until 324. And then in 325, the very next year, so he had just stepped down. Well, he didn't step down, he just swapped to being the representative of the sun god to being the representative of Jesus Christ. And that very year he swapped, he called the Council of Nicaea and told the church that they had to come to this agreement. And the church didn't oppose this pagan influence into their church, they exalted it. And they used it. And they became, they did the exact things that all these nations had done. They exalted themselves in opposition to heaven and in persecution against God's people.
Makes a lot more sense than other things I've heard. A lot more common sense. even if I'm having trouble getting ahead. Look, I know the whole transfer from, pagan to papal. Although I wouldn't necessarily put it in words that you have because they're your words, not mine. We'll explain the same thing differently. Yeah, because we knew that the daily was the pagan, but it's how do you explain it that that's what the scriptures actually show? I think it's not so much the fact that we didn't know what the daily was, but it's like how do we explain to Joe Blow down the street who knows nothing of prophecy, nothing of the Bible, nothing of Rome? How do you explain to them that the daily's pagan Rome? I think that's the probably bit we had trouble with. Or that could be just me. More than likely just me. Even though it's something, the daily's pagan Rome. Okay, we know that now. But how do you explain it? And I think what you've done tonight is you've explained how we get it. If that makes sense. Yeah.